I'm delighted to say that I'm now joined by Harry Wilkinson from Net Zero Watch. Harry, very good morning to you. You were on last night as well, I seem to remember. This is an interesting story because I'm hoping that you can explain to me about some of the stuff that Rishi Sunak announced yesterday. He's talked about exploring for new oil and gas in the North Sea, but also he's setting up this multi-billion-pound carbon capture business. Now, I think, like most people, I don't really understand what carbon capture is. So what is it, and is it worth doing?
Well, what carbon capture and storage is all about is really filling some of those empty spaces, those caverns that have been created by the extraction of oil and gas in the first place, filling it with CO2 and just sealing it and storing it there. But it has been a very expensive process in the past. It's part of what the industry says is its pathway to it being a more, carbon neutral industry. However, I think we should.
But is that more in the kind of the wording more than anything else?
We should take these claims with a pinch of salt. The technology hasn't really been proven on an affordable mass scale anywhere in the world so far. But I think it's worth welcoming that Rishi Sunak seems to be taking a more reasonable approach to energy at the moment. He said he's still committed to net zero, but he wants to make sure it doesn't come at a cost burden to people, that it shouldn't involve banning things.
Exactly, and I think for a lot of people that's a reasonably sensible position. I mean, there are plenty of people who, like me, are dubious about the whole escapade of net zero, because I'm not even sure, and I still haven't yet got anyone to explain to me exactly what it is. And what I mean by that is that when you ask a politician, what is net zero, they give you the stock answer, well, it's when you neutralise the amount of carbon that you are expending into the air by doing something else. And you go, well, fine, but why are you going to do that? And then they say, well, of course, it's because we want to show an example to the rest of the world, even though we know it won't make any difference. So the whole point of it is sort of slightly nebulous for me. But if you want to absolutely go down that road, by all means, but don't let it cost us a long load of money.
And that's, what Net Zero Watch has been saying for a long time, is that we're not against, the desire to get emissions down and to reduce the impact when it comes to climate change of our emissions. However, it has to be affordable. It has to not leave people worse off, not leave people poorer and colder. And we've heard so much from politicians, as you say, over the years about how we're going to deliver a net zero, we're going to deliver these climate targets without much focus on the cost. But now we have Rishi Sunak saying it can't cost people the earth, and he's got to explain that to the public. And actually, I think he would do very well to highlight a disconnect with the Labour Party, who wants to be more ambitious, and actually contrast that with the Conservative approach that's actually about doing this in a far more affordable way.
But even Keir Starmer's been under fire, hasn't he, recently, because he kind of looked as if he was putting the net zero kind of production in the north of the country and in Scotland on the back burner, and so he was kind of being criticised for that. But Sunak's gone even further, hasn't he?
Well, finally, the whole debate seems to be opening up. And I think there will be lots of tensions in the Labour Party as well. We've seen Ed Miliband, who wants to go further, faster than anyone else, seemingly with no sense of what the consequences of that would be for ordinary people. Whereas you've got Keir Starmer, who I think is a bit more sensible. He can see that this will hurt ordinary people, and he's trying to rein in Ed Miliband, who doesn't want to be reined in. So we're seeing tensions in the Labour Party as well. I welcome the fact that this debate is finally opening up. We're actually questioning how we're going to get there. We're looking at what are the cost implications for ordinary people. We were told by going for wind and solar, our bills would come down, but actually over the last decade or more, prices have just gone up and up in terms of electricity, in terms of our energy needs, and so it hasn't delivered. And we see the countries with the highest level of renewables have the highest electricity prices. So that also
the irony, it seems to me, of an awful lot of this move to just create more electricity and power more things with electricity rather than gas or anything else, is an awful lot of the electricity is actually generated by and fuelled by gas. So it's a kind of, it's robbing Peter to pay Paul, if you like.
That's right. And I think the government needs to focus on getting the price of that electricity down. It says it wants to do a lot of things with electricity instead of gas. And for that to be affordable, you have to get the price of electricity down a long way. If the government just focused on cost, actually it would find many of the other things that it wants to do come much more easily because heat pumps is an issue we've discussed a lot. Those are very difficult to install and actually lead to bill reductions for people. If electricity came down a long way, then we might be in a different position.
Exactly. Well, I'm just reading a piece here in front of me from Justin Rowlett, the famous climate editor of the BBC, who's written a piece today about how the way we heat our homes is going to change. And he reckons that in 12 years' time, you won't be able to buy a gas boiler anymore. Now, I just think that's the sort of ridiculous statement that people really object to. Because up in Scotland, they're trying to make out that if you have a gas boiler, you may find it more difficult to sell your home. But gas is by far and away the most efficient and the cheapest way to do anything.
Well, people like Justin Rowlett just want to make these pronouncements and say that they'll happen in this absolutist way. Look at the effects for ordinary people. If you want to install a heat pump for your house, you probably need potentially tens of thousands of pounds on energy efficiency upgrades. And after all of that, you may have a boiler that doesn't heat your house as well and isn't as good as what you got before. Well, it's a very mixed
picture, isn't it? I mean, we had a note from somebody yesterday who said that they had a heat pump installed in a block of flats, because I was saying I think it's very difficult to do that. I don't know who they are, but they said it was working fine. I also know people who have got quite big houses who have had them installed and they don't work at all. But again, another one of Justin Rowlatt's kind of proclamations. He says, heating our homes accounts for as much as 16% of the UK's planet-warming carbon dioxide emissions. Now, does he mean heating our homes in Britain? Does he mean heating our homes in America? What does he actually mean by that?
Well, he's looking at the UK specifically. It's worth remembering that these are the government's policies as well, unfortunately, because for too long they have just been following what the climate
nobody's really questioned them, have they?
And there is a target to actually phase out new gas boilers from 2035. So, these policies are unlikely to be delivered. The government needs to realise that sooner rather than later. We've got a target as well with petrol and diesel vehicles to say we won't allow new sales of those either. These policies will do real damage to people if they're allowed to go ahead.
But we've also got people like Jaguar Land Rover and Volvo saying after that time we're not going to make any more petrol and diesel cars anyway. Well, I mean, which I find astonishing.
The UK is a relatively small car market in the grand scheme of things. There will be plenty of companies providing petrol and diesel cars way beyond even if the UK
I get that. But if Jaguar Land Rover say they're just not going to make them, that's quite a statement.
Well, this is the sort of corporate madness that we see, because actually, they've moved from actually producing vehicles that people want to buy to try and persuading, in cahoots with the government. They want the government to help them persuade people to buy the products that they're producing. Traditionally it's been the other way around, and they've actually tried to meet their consumers' needs.
I'm told, and you probably can confirm this, that one of the reasons why there's a shortage of sort of electric car networks in the country is because a lot more electric cars are out there. Not because people particularly wanted them, but because the government gave tax breaks to companies to buy electric cars for their fleets. To give to their employees, which is what they've done. But now there's not enough charging points for them to all manage to get their cars charged at the same time. So there's been this sort of fake surge in purchasing electric cars, and it's now fallen back again.
Well, the figures have been somewhat stitched up by the fact that all of the new sales in EVs, or at least a large proportion of them, have been company car fleets. They haven't been people choosing to buy them.
Right.
We now have a massive, reductions in the prices of second-hand vehicles, which are electric vehicles. The prices aren't holding up, and that's a reflection of people's real preferences. They're not finding these cars as good as their old petrol and diesel cars, and politicians should look at that, reflect. These products aren't delivering. They need to have humility about that, and they need to offer people choice, because if you have an outright ban and you're forcing people to use what is not a preferred product by consumers, you will just leave people either with a worse car or not even being able to afford to drive at all, and that will be a huge backward step. We've got all these things that work in this country. We've got gas boilers which work. We've got cars that work. And there is a war on things that work. It's crazy.
Exactly right. Why would you discontinue things that work, which are cheaper and which are more easy to use, for something which is more expensive, more difficult to use, and less kind of, shall we say, agile as a product. I mean, electric cars now are better than they used to be, but they're still in no way any kind of substitute for driving long distances. They're not a good way of getting around town, particularly. You know, they're very heavy. There's an awful lot of things wrong with them, basically.
Well, we often talk about being climate leaders in the UK, but it's used in this very superficial way, because politicians can just make a target and then say they're the world leader without having achieved anything.
Right.
You know, if we want to be a world leader, let's develop the products that people would choose to buy without compulsion, and not force them to buy things that they don't want to buy.
It's a bit like these declarations at the end of COP26 and COP27. You know, the declarations don't really mean anything. You know, they make a promise which they inevitably later on don't keep. So what's the point? And
I think that's feeding the the disappointment that many people are seeing in politics, because they don't trust the pledges. They see politicians that are more interested in getting kudos for themselves at these international conferences, rather than delivering affordable, achievable policies that improve people's lives. It should be about helping people. It shouldn't be about just winning credit on the international stage.
Absolutely. You'll be pleased to know that you're being appreciated. Bernie says this: Harry Wilkinson gives me hope for my grandson's future. We see so many young folk being virtue signalling crazies. Harry seems so sensible.
Oh, well, it's very nice to hear that.
But it's true. You know, we hear now from the new guy who's in charge of the IPCC, Professor Jim Skee, that actually all of this catastrophising that people do actually has counterproductive results, because people, one, just switch off when you say the world's going to burn up in 2035 and we're all going to die. And so he says the combination of that means that people either do nothing because they think it's all hopeless, and loads of 16 to 24-year-olds think it's true, and on the other hand, it dulls everybody's senses to the point where they say, well, you know, what's the point?
It's so refreshing to hear that. And many people of my generation and younger are absolutely terrified about climate change, because they've only been fed a sort of alarmist set of facts which don't really reflect what the science is showing on climate change, and don't reflect the enormous improvements that we've seen. You know, we do see far fewer deaths in extreme weather events, and that's because of human development, human ingenuity, technological progress.
Well, I mean, look at
and we
what
can
was
expect that to continue.
Just 2 weeks ago, when Europe was on fire, and apparently nobody'd ever seen anything like it. Well, nobody's saying anything about that now, because guess what? It's not on fire.
And no one pointed out that actually the burnt area in terms of wildfires across Europe has been coming down over recent years. So there's all this alarm on one side, and there's none of the context, none of the facts that don't go with the narrative that might lead people to different conclusions. What we've seen is an explosion of reporting of wildfires, maybe more so than any increase in wildfires. That's not to say, you know, there hasn't been more fire weather, hot temperatures, drier weather that is associated with a warming climate. You know, we shouldn't say that those factors aren't real, but we should be optimistic about the fact that we can deal with this,
but also
we can manage it.
And let's not exaggerate things and make things out to be completely ludicrous, because Professor Skee again has also said that he doesn't believe that if the temperature of the planet rises by 1.5%, which is what, or 1.5 degrees rather, which is what the climate kind of crazies are saying will kill us all. He says it won't actually kill the planet. Yes, it will make it warmer, and there'll be things that are bad as a result, but what it won't do is destroy the planet.
Well, 1.5 degrees came out of a political process during the COP negotiations, where some small island states said that they weren't happy with the previous 2-degree target. They thought the islands would be, you know, sinking underwater unless it was 1.5. Now, that's not the reality. A lot of these Pacific islands are actually expanding. They're building new islands. They're building airports. So there is hope for these countries. They won't just fall under the sea. That's if no one did anything. But of course, people will do things, and they will be protected. So then the politicians ask the scientists, come up with a report that backs it up. So it hasn't come from the science, it's come from the politicians. And he's quite right that, you know, the world's not going to end if we exceed 1.5. We are actually very close to 1.5 at the moment.